topic. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the stuff that's coming down the pipe in Unreal Engine 4.27 and what that means for games. And I think there isn't much specifically that I want to talk about here, or that we want to talk about. I think it's mostly just kind of a looking at it and saying, boy, oh boy, there's a lot of stuff in here that Epic, the creators of the Unreal Engine, are highlighting uh, that doesn't appear to be terribly game focused. And what does this mean for gamers, if anything?
Yeah, I mean, like given that, what was the lion's share of the feature updates that were available in the patch notes?
Yeah, so they seemed to really make a big deal of a lot of their software that is targeted towards the cinema industry, like movies and TV. I think there was a bit of a news, um, like some interesting news items came out uh, either earlier this year or late last year, where Disney's The Mandalorian was filmed in part thanks to Unreal Engine because they render the space where the actors are isn't they didn't go out into a desert. They're in a film studio with a 360-degree basically projection screen. And what's projected onto that screen is rendered by the Unreal Engine.
And,
So
and
it's
I
real
should
time.
say,
Go ahead.
as a bit of back history on that as well, is
Yeah.
this had begun to be developed with Jon Favreau, who
Yeah.
who did create Mandalorian, going as far back as the Jungle Book when he filmed that film, which had live action actors interacting with digital characters on a digital stage. That it was beginning to get pioneered there, and then finally sort of come into like a fully realized system in the Mandalorian, and it's now being used in additional shows.
Yeah. They're trying to really push it and expand it. And it seems to be gaining a lot of steam in production workflows for film and video and TV and everything. Um, where they have some of the patch notes include things like, well, cinematic and virtual production updates. It's a huge section of their update list, which includes stuff like lens distortion, um, and being able to control lens distortion, which is kind of some of the stuff that you would do with hardware
One of
cameras
the
in the
really
past.
cool features that they kind of highlighted here,
Yeah.
which it goes to show like how much R&D has to go into these sort of things, was a lot of the practical use of this now is to simulate driving in a car. And the way that they used to do this in film was by having a projection screen behind a set car that people would be sitting in, and they would just be projecting things. And you get a lot of weird anomalies from that, where it's like the angle didn't quite match up. And in like the things that were going on in the background didn't quite match, because what they would do is they'd literally sit with a camera in a car, trailing be like on top of a car, and it would be driving around, like say in New York City, and they take that film, project it on the screen, where it would be played back behind actors that are sitting in a prop car, like I had said. Um, Same exact idea on this, but you have a lot more control over it. But
Mhm.
so one of the things they fell into and realized is that you're dealing with two vectors of movement. One is the simulated movement of a car moving through a space, even though it's stationary. And so, as trees pass by and whatever, you need to use motion blur, because if you don't simulate it, it's just fully rendered 3D objects that track across the screen and don't have any blur behind them, which is jarring and unnatural for anybody who's looking at it. But sometimes, especially nowadays with the sort of technology we have, uh, directors will want to move the camera around the car, through the car, and have these interesting tracking shots that will happen. They had to figure out how to deal with the fact that you would get motion blur from the camera tracking and the simulated movement. So they actually had to come up with a system that would compensate for the camera's movement and adjust the motion blur accordingly, so you wouldn't get too much motion blur.
They're doing a lot of stuff to make those production workflows improve. And to an extent, my understanding is that technologies like Nanite, which we've talked about here before, and the related stuff. Nanite is, as a quick refresh, is their new rendering technology in Unreal Engine 5 that they've been making a big deal about, where they break up. You can use massive 3D models, and then at runtime, and then
And a lot of
they
this was also came out of, again, cinema and film, where
yeah,
it's not uncommon practice for 3D and digital film sets to use a photogrammetry system that will get, depth models of, landscape and backgrounds and reproduce it in 3D. So they had to produce a system that could render that in real time without it killing rendering pipelines.
yeah, and that pushed them to make this advancement, and now they're talking about it. When they announced Nanite, they showed it in a game, and clearly this is something that is going to affect the movie industry as well, and probably came out from learnings from working with the film industry and the requirements there. Like, can we do this? We really want to use these full quality assets. We can't use the dumbed down like LOD models you use in games because those just look janky. Like, we need real stuff. The takeaway I think for me on this is that the Unreal Engine is seeing like a convergence between workflows between film and games. And I think as part of that, we're going to see more and more of the production tools that game developers use are going to be similar to, if not the exact same tools that are used by people making film and TV as well. And that as more of this happens, we'll see more and more capabilities show up in the engine. Another big thing that was announced was DMX and MIDI and OSC controls for the Unreal Engine, which means you can control certain aspects of what's going on inside of the simulated world inside of Unreal Engine using DMX, which is a lighting protocol they use for stage lighting in concerts and stuff. OSC is another protocol like that, and MIDI, which is used typically for music, but also has a lighting use case in many cases. So those are really designed for performances and stage lighting and stage production. And if you have a control deck that says, "Okay, here's how I am," a stage producer for such and such big, you know, music act talent. Uh, I can take everything that I know how to use all my software, and then instead of targeting a physical stage, I'm going to target, Fortnite.
Yeah, or like crossover experiences between game development and
Yeah,
what is live movie production, um, which is where these gains have been made. Because before, if you wanted to do anything like this, maybe the earliest example was like Avatar,
yeah,
where James Cameron had to look peer through a camera in order to see the virtual world rendered crudely, to see what exactly he was filming and what it might look like in like a sort of wireframe way. And this, film, as it's gone more and more digital, has now realized that waiting days for renders to see what anything looks like is not optimal for their pipelines, and the way that graphics have advanced in real-time engines satisfy the needs for a lot of the film production, and allow them to make some compromises in the fidelity of what's happening, but allow them to work in real time with, in this case, Unreal, and getting like, a simulated 3D world rendered around the actors, and getting the light source to be accurate to what will be done on a final render.
I mean, they're doing things that are. I mean, I'm trying to think about how to do this in and make it useful for games, but nothing's coming to mind exactly off the top of my head. They've integrated OpenCV, which is open computer vision, which is a model for, well, it's a library that allows software to kind of gain some ability to see what's going on in the world, and if you and like view QR codes and recognize a QR code, that kind of thing. What they're using it for is, at least in one case that they announced, is for doing lens distortion detection, and being able to write into the shaders. They've produced a effectively lens distortion shader that will allow them to compensate so that the distortion from the lens itself is something that can be what's the term, adapted for in the software, so that things line up as you would expect, and you don't get weird lens shearing where like the background doesn't quite map correctly as a camera tracks because of how the light bends into the lens itself. And you have, your projected 2D background versus your 3D actors in the middle. So it's like fascinating stuff like that that they're adding. Some of it may or may not be useful for the games industry, but overall, it's merging the workflows for the two industries, which is, it'll be interesting to see what comes from all of that in the next few years. I think.
Yeah, definitely. And there actually was another bit of detail in the patch notes that they have available for both for 4.27, and
Yep.
that's their focus on some of the VR
Yeah.
um, increases. And VR has
Yeah.
been kind of a weird space because, uh, like if you look at the timeline of VR, I'd say
Yeah.
it's probably now close to like 10 years that they've been sort
Cool.
of had commercial grade VR hardware available. Um,
About 7 or 8 years now
yeah,
that,
yeah, it's probably
yeah.
close to that. But originally it was like the Oculus.
Yep.
That was a standalone unit, or not a standalone unit. That was a unit that had to be connected to a PC.
Mhm.
And then came in like the HTC Vive and Valve's offerings.
And you had the
Um,
Google Cardboard and the Samsung, whatever that was.
yeah, I mean, there's been a bunch of solutions, but really it started off at hardcore gaming, and pushing like high definition renders and all that stuff, and then it's sort of got swept under mobile, because it's just a cheaper way to get into it. You can have a standalone device without having to plug into a computer. Um, but like the biggest selling VR platform now is Facebook. Um,
The Oculus too, yeah.
yeah, the Oculus 2. So it's kind of interesting to see Unreal pushing again for uh, VR solutions, which may say something actually more about the fact that Sony is pushing again for
Yeah.
a high end hardware solution. And I think we talked last week about some of the rumors around it and what Sony's trying to do to make hardcore, or like hardcore, but like professional level VR, uh,
Mhm.
taking another stab at it to make it more mainstream. Um, Whereas like the Oculus Quest has kind of gone in the other direction, where it's like sort of just okay with having mobile level graphics and not like this cutting edge visual experience.